Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and today I'm joined by Sam Harvey, who's a team and executive coach. He's a former competitive sprinter, self-proclaimed nerd and certificate collector, and the founder of Braver Leaders. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Who describes themselves as that? But yeah, thank you, Charlotte. Lovely to be here.
I'm sure we will find out who describes themselves like that as we go through this conversation. I have no doubt whatsoever. So,
You're awesome.
Sam, I met you recently through a friend of ours that we have in common, and it was just a no-brainer to bring you onto the show, given what it is you talk about, but also your backstory. And I just really love the way you bring your personality to what you do. Like, you're very, very authentic. And I know a big part of your mission is to show people that, you know, sharing their story can have a profound impact, not only on their personal connections, but also their experience of the workplace as well. So a good place to start, I think, is with your story. Tell us.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you again for bringing me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's been lovely to connect with you. I love it when you kind of you meet your tribe just like that, right? It's one of my favorite things, you know, when you sit down, you're like, oh, we're friends. It's not even like we should be friends. It's just we're already mates. So yeah, no, thank you very much. And my story, yeah, as you mentioned, I was a competitive sprinter when I was younger. Ran the 100 meters pretty quickly. Did that through school, and then ran for my country and ran and competed nationally and internationally. And then went to the Sports Institute, which was kind of contained a bunch of New Zealand people who went on to be New Zealand All Blacks and New Zealand cricketers. And yeah, loved it, right? Loved doing that. But definitely I had a very fixed mindset around that. It was, and when I lost a few races, you know, I was like, oh, I'm not fast anymore. Rather than I need to work harder, it was like, oh, I'm not fast anymore. That was a big part of my story growing up. But what I also discovered back then was the sport that I was in didn't have much of a pay packet, and by much I mean any. And so rugby had just become professional in 1995. So you know, I was at Sports Institute 3 or 4 years after that. So just coming out of school, which will show my age, but I'm cool with that. And then yeah, sort of discovered, well, I can't actually go and earn a living from that. So got out of that and went into the world of business, and have worked around the world running many different type of companies, tourism. I've worked in media, hospitality, and then also manufacturing for hospitality. So coffee was a big part of that. Loved that. Like, coffee was so much fun. And I guess the kind of underlying part of that, because that's the CV, isn't it, almost? But the underlying part of that was that from a very early age, I drank and used drugs like really heavily, right? And it wasn't until I started drinking when I was about like 14 or 15, and quite heavily, and because of the way I felt, right? And it was this, I wanted to feel something other than I felt. I wouldn't have been able to put those words to it back then. But I'll talk about this a little bit later. I'm hypervigilant, and so it's like this kind of quelling of nerves and calming myself down. But then I hate being out of control as well. So I would drink to feel calm, hate being out of control, and use uppers, cocaine, whatever, all of those kind of things to make myself feel normal. And yeah, it took me 20, if I say I started when I'm 15, I don't know that for a fact, but somewhere there or thereabouts. It took me 22 years to figure that out. And so, and with addiction and alcoholism, it's a progressive thing where it slowly gets worse and worse and worse over time, never better. And yeah, that was where I found myself, and I lost a job in 2018. And you know, I still maintain that that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was like this straw that broke the camel's back. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, losing a job is nothing, you know. And it made me go, oh man, I have to sort this out. And I did. I went through a 12-step program when I got clean and sober, and now I'm, you know, coming up in 6 years clean, right? And it's a completely different life. But that's the sort of story. That's the underlying story. And that led me to looking at braver leaders. How do we grow, and how do we help teams? How do we help people share their story authentically? And now I kind of look at it and go, man, like, what a gift, to have had this thing happen in my life, that I can now look at and go, oh man, how lucky am I? Because I could be dead now. Like I was getting very sick very regularly because of the way I was using drugs, right? I had this facade around me that I looked good and I felt like everyone thought I was good, but it was just a facade, and yeah, the way it turned out, like, and now that I can kind of look at it and go, I can share that and it grows trust. What a gift. So that's the Reader's Digest version, even though I probably went on a bit. It's the Reader's Digest version of my story.
No, I'm so happy that you shared all of you, because I think it's so, so important. It's so easy, isn't it, on podcasts for us to go to the CV and then go straight into business, and I think it's hard really to do that authentically unless you know where somebody has come from. And then especially for you, like how then that gift is then transcended into the workplaces as well. But just before we kind of dive into that and maybe some of the specifics around what made you take this kind of path after, or during your recovery, is that I think it's really important that we cover that a lot of other people feel like this, and it might be drug or alcohol abuse, but I think it's very, very common for people to want to feel something that they're not. And I think this is something that doesn't get enough talk about, particularly in professional settings. So I think it's absolutely necessary that perhaps we kind of touch on that a little bit, and perhaps what you've learned and what you've then seen since and during your recovery when it comes to perhaps some of the correlation that we see with others as well, how it resonates.
Yeah, it's so true. I think two things, right? Like everybody's going through something, aren't they? Everybody. And so when I share that story, the amount of people I've come up and who just say, oh, I've got somebody, could you help? I've got a friend in Dubai who, I shared that story with her and she was like, oh, a family member, can you help me? And so that's what I love to do, right? Yeah, of course I can. And I'll try and direct them to the meetings too. It doesn't always work, it's, I'm one of the lucky ones. But I think as well, like really, really it's connected me, and what I'm still learning is it's not what I've learned, right? It's what I'm still learning is that feeling things is okay. It's normal. Man, I've had 2023 was by far, like, I had all of that happen in 2018. 2023 was by far the hardest year of my life, by far. And because I'm sober and because I can feel all of these things, I still just feel them. Doesn't make it nice. In fact, it makes it bloody hard sometimes. But you kind of just the ability to go, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? Where am I feeling that? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Often it's sort of this weight in your chest or something in your throat. And I think that's an experience people get a lot. But your body is such a powerful tool to go, what am I feeling? And where is that, right? And why am I feeling that? And then I noticed that when I do that, often it dissipates, right? It's that urge surfing, so you kind of jump on the wave and then you go, okay, cool. It's a bit easier now. So, and if I'd known that growing up, like I probably wouldn't have, maybe I wouldn't have used as much. I don't know. But yeah, that's definitely the tool that I've been using, what I've been noticing since.
It's so powerful for anybody listening, because that sheer acknowledgement of what you're going through that is, I think, the most powerful thing. I mean, my coaching clients hate it if I say, well, they don't hate it, but I think when they first hear me say it, they're confused because they tell me perhaps of something they're experiencing. I'm like, fantastic. Even if it's something that's not great, I'm like, because you're feeling it, you're recognizing it, you're observing it, you're acknowledging it for what it is. So yes, it sucks. And I don't love that you're having a hard time right now, as a person, I don't love that for you, but because of what I know about your health and well-being, this is going to serve you so well. And it's such a gift. Just you sharing that alone, by the way, is such a gift for anybody listening, to just pause and recognize, what is it? What is it that's going on? Where do I feel that? That's the starting point, isn't it? Just allowing yourself and giving yourself permission sometimes to share, to notice it for yourself.
Yeah, permission's a big thing, isn't it? Like giving ourselves permission. I said to my therapist recently, who's brilliant, um, she had said something to me, and I was like, "Thanks for the permission." And she's like, "You can give yourself that, Sam," and you can, right? Like just to feel things, and it sounds so easy to say because, and the whole reason all of this exists, isn't it, is that it's actually really uncomfortable to sit in feeling most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And so just sitting in it and going, oh, this is awful, is really tough. And that's why we numb.
Yeah.
And that's why we choose to numb to avoid, essentially, right? And that numbing looks like it has many different forms, right? Excessive exercise
Yeah.
is numbing,
Yeah.
right? Constantly needing to be with somebody else is a form of numbing, right? So there's this ability or inability, I think, because we're so stimulated all the time now, to just looking at your phone and scrolling, that's numbing. Doing work until midnight, that's numbing, right? Avoiding. So yeah, it comes in many different forms. It's not just in a bottle or a drug.
Exactly. So talking of working until midnight and the workplace, why has your journey led you into this arena, I guess, is what I'm really curious to know.
That's a really good question. I think what I know now is, as I touched on before, I'm hyper vigilant, right? And so is my mum, and I've got so much empathy for my mum now because of that, right? And her and I had a really tough time growing up. I was a terrible teenager, Charlotte. I was awful.
It doesn't
Um,
surprise me that you might have been a bit of a troublemaker, I have to say.
yeah, exactly. But she and I had this moment with her when I was home in New Zealand recently, where I was just like, "Oh, you're the same as me." And my mum, like when you ask her, and I'm reaching a point here, but when you ask her a question, she'll often kind of give you this like long-winded story or work around it or whatever. And I was like, when you're constantly thinking about other people and how they feel, aren't you? And she just goes, "Yep." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. You never respond like that." And so the point of me telling you this is that what led me into this arena is that I'm very good, and this is a blessing and a curse, at picking up mood shifts, mood changes, right? And so in a room, especially in team coaching, I love to be in a room because when the mood shifts, I can sense it really, really easily, right? And so and now I know that I've got the ability to go, "Oh, what just happened?
Yeah.
Did everyone else feel that?" And sometimes the answer is no, but generally the system feels it, right? And so I'm really fascinated on that energy between people, which sounds super woo-woo, but I love it, right? That kind of, oh, hey, that's interesting. Why did that just happen? What's going on between you two? And how can we address it
Yeah.
in an interesting way, which helps you get it out? And create, which I think we're going to come on to, like psychological safety between you.
Yeah.
How do we create that safety where you feel you can actually bring out things between you? I love that stuff.
Yeah.
And it came to me, well, it sounds like I've just, by a bolt of lightning or some divine inspiration. I learned it in a lecture in New Zealand about high performing teams. And that was where that love came from, this fascination. I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. Cool. And I'm very grateful for that, right? Because it was like, oh, okay, I know what I'm going to do now. And that's where this kind of obsession started Brave Leaders, created a course, did more study, still going on that wagon. Yeah, exactly. Certificates. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from, is that I wouldn't again have been able to say that at the time, that it's because I'm hyper vigilant and because I pick those things up. But now I know that it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly why, right? Because I sense those temperature shifts.
Which is amazing. And I think that's something that sometimes it doesn't come as naturally to everybody, for sure. And I think when we're talking about a workplace context as well, often there's so much energy in a workplace coming from so many angles and so many different pressures that it can be really hard to then tune in to perhaps the energy that we need to, right? And when we say energy, we talk about like the mood and the tone of what's happening within an organization or within a team, within the people. Right. So like you said earlier, it's like it could sound a bit woo-woo, but I think everybody can recognize the fact that, they've been maybe in a conversation with somebody and suddenly it just sort of shifts and it just gets a bit strange, or there's this conversation that's happening that suddenly gets a bit more heated and maybe it's not as warranted. And it's like, that's not woo-woo, that's day-to-day life, I think, personally. And I think sometimes we get so busy, go on to the next thing, that we forget to actually pause and address that. And I think the work that you do is so important, because you are, helping teams essentially take a pause and understand what is actually happening about just moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, thank you. And that's really kind of you to say. And I think totally. And it's not easy. And the funny thing is when you walk this talk, when you walk this walk, you have to talk. What am I trying to say? Talk this talk, you have to walk this walk. That's it. Actually, my good friend Damien and I did this very thing yesterday, where he approached me and was like, I want to bring something up with you because it made me feel a bit funny, and I just want to presence it. And we conflicted, like not not in that we had an argument, we just had a disagreement, right? And it was like, interesting, how do we work that out? And we stayed in relation and worked that through, because of his ability. He's very similar, to bring that up and go, that made me feel a bit funny. And that's what we need to get people to, right, is to understand that actually bringing those things up and not avoiding, understanding that everybody has these different kind of communication styles, attachment styles, which make them act in certain ways, understanding your own, and how you're bringing yourself into the business, and then bringing it to the fore and going, this is what's going on for me, is super powerful, super powerful.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting that you use the example of your friend, right? Because within friendships, there's often a sense of safety, right? There's this feeling that it's okay to actually bring that up with you. And I think this is something that obviously I want to dive into with you today, is the term psychological safety, because it's getting thrown around left, right, and center. Just go onto LinkedIn and there'll probably be 10 posts of people talking about it in slightly different ways. So I would love for you to perhaps just describe what is psychological safety, and then we'll probably dive into that a bit more.
Cool. I think it's conflict readiness. So it's about candor rather than coziness. And so we are not talking about a place where everybody feels nice all of the time. It's about, actually, this feels quite tough and I'm going to bring it up anyway. And I'm going to stop there because I don't want to make it any fluffier.
I think that's so succinct and so on point. And my kind of follow-up question to that, what are some of the misconceptions you've seen around psychological safety? And I think, for me, you've just almost answered that, because like there is this notion, okay, well, if we're safe, then it's cozy, we're all buddies, and there's, our colleagues like our family. And I think the way you've described it, it actually makes perfect sense. But then how do we grow from that place? So are there any other misconceptions that we need to know of?
No, I think that's the biggest, right? Is that, psychological safety implies coziness, and that is not it at all, right? And you bring up an interesting point about family, right? And my family, I actually had this situation recently where there was some disagreement on the term family. We're a family culture, right? And the person that brought it up to me rightly said, my family's not like that. It's like, that's interesting, because mine is, right? We will argue and then we come back together, and it's fine, like we don't fall out. I've never spent any time not speaking to my siblings or anything like that, right? Like we're good like that. There's been some pretty decent arguments, but we kind of all come together at the end of the day and just crack on, and my business partner, Baz, that's actually one of the things that I value the most about him as a human, and I consider him part of my family, right? Is that we can really stay in uneasiness and disagree, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that he will be there for me through thick or thin tomorrow, and he knows the same, right? And so that's the thing, is this ability to stand up and go, no, I don't agree with you. And have your say.
That's so powerful, isn't it? Because then you get to actually move forward in a way that's clear, but also that's aligned. Because you can agree to disagree to some extent, so long as you've both been seen and heard. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. That's I believe almost that exact thing, is that people will move forward and buy in if they've had their chance to say their piece, right? So they don't have to get their way. The one thing I would add to that is that the term agree to disagree, and there's some really interesting research around this about how actually the church of all things use like tension and paradoxes between their leaders. So, for example, the dean of a school or of a religious school and the purser sit opposite one on each other. So it's literally God and money. You don't get like two more opposing things in that, right? And so they keep this tension to try and avoid agree to disagree. And so the point of it is that they stay in tension in relation to work things through to get to the best outcome, rather than it just being like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. And so, yes, absolutely, people need to have their say and say their piece and then agree, you know, with whatever the outcome is. But there's a need to stay in tension for a little while to make sure that you're actually kind of really hashing things through, not just yeah, cool, we'll move on now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And almost that you win, I give up kind of mentality.
Exactly.
That breeds resentment, doesn't it? And that's the last thing
100%
to bring into the future.
Yeah, 100%. And that's really becoming the job of a leader, is holding space, right? Hold the space, let that, and when you think you're done and everybody's in agreement, I saw a quote recently, which was, it's an old school quote, so it says gentleman in it. So I'll use the quote just because, you know, that's what it says. But it's like, gentlemen, I can see we're all in agreement. I suggest we go away and sleep on it and come back when we're not. You know, like disagree, like come back, argue things passionately, and then, you know, you get the best outcomes.
So what contributes to psychological safety?
Great question. You need trust first, right? So that's the kind of thing that we will always front foot when we work, right? Is so we lead with the personal stories. We lead with okay, go and tell me a little bit about your life. Go for a walk for 25 minutes and talk about something really challenging you've got going on in your life right now, to create those bonds. And you know, you can use tools and techniques to do that, but it does take a bit of time as well to really be in that space where you have a lot of trust, right? So that would be the first thing I think is kind of awareness of psychological safety comes about through trust, right? And you only get trust through vulnerability. It doesn't come the other way around. It's not, I'm going to trust you and then be vulnerable. And you hear a lot of people saying, oh, I'm going to, you've always got trust with me. You know, it starts with trust and you have to lose it. And it's like, well, actually deep trust comes when people are vulnerable. So that's the first thing. And then developing an awareness of each other's lives and skills, right? So what do your teammates like? Are they as a person? What's their family like? What, you know, you create that kind of, and that's where this family culture things comes from, I think, because people know each other implicitly. They have this they just kind of desire to go to war with each other. You know, like it's a silly term potentially to use, but like to go to battle with each other in the business room, right? So yeah, then you can start conflicting, and you need to practice conflicting, right? So getting in a room and teaching people, okay, well, there's a disagree. Here's a point of view over here and a point of view over here. How do we meet in the middle and actually make sure that each other is listening to one another, and then, you know, using tools and techniques like, well, okay, what I hear is this, is that right? And, you know, so essentially being Socratic and being a coach in an argument, but it's very difficult, right? Because you get heated in the moment. It's like, I don't agree with you, and my point's this, and I want to be right. And so holding the kind of relationship as the paramount thing, the relationship here is more important to me than being right. Then we will likely move forward. Yeah. So those would be the kind of key tenets for me is psychological safety built through trust, building awareness, and then actually conflicting and practicing that.
I really like your kind of take on this, and I want to just come back to the first point you mentioned about trust and vulnerability.
Yeah.
How does somebody be vulnerable if the trust isn't present?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's hard, right? Because why would I? And so the answer is it's probably not what people want to hear, but you just have to take a risk, right? And when you take those little micro risks, who is it that talks about this? I think it's Brene Brown actually, about putting marbles in people's jars.
Yep.
So imagine you carry a jar of marbles around, right? And so if you're vulnerable to someone, you're putting one in their jar, and they then return the favor and blah blah blah, back and forth. So yeah, people. One of my favorite things that to think about and talk about is that homophily, right? People look around them and they want to act how others are acting. So when I come to London, I wear black. For example, one of my favorites actually is when you stand at the crosswalk and the little red person is up on the crosswalk, and if someone else walks, you watch and everyone else walks,
Yeah.
right? No, not everyone, but like I've stood there and I purposefully don't now because I just watch and watch as people do it. But the urge in me is like, oh, I want to walk, I want to walk, I want to walk.
Yeah.
And so my point of this is we look around us for how to act, right? So if you go first, others will follow, right? And as a leader, it's so important that you set the tone by going deep and going early.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say if you didn't. It's about it being leaders go first. And it's
Mm,
so necessary because like you said, it is a risk. It can be a risk, or it can feel like a risk at least to be vulnerable.
totally.
And when you're talking about vulnerability and sharing to the point that creates psychological safety, are we talking about your deepest, darkest secrets? Are we talking about maybe something small at first and then, opening that conversation more deeply as you go?
I think you're asking the wrong person for this. I mean, I believe go hard and go deep, right? But and I do because I believe that if I go here, so further, someone else might come here, and that's a good start, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I've had been doing team coaching sessions when I've had some people share some deeply personal stuff, right? And everybody in the room just kind of stops and goes, oh, and at that moment, business is gone and people are connecting.
Yeah.
So my belief through practice is go deep, right? Connect as humans. And when you do that, that vibration of, oh man, that's deep. Yo, like, are you okay? And when that happens, you've got a real chance to build safety,
Yeah.
candor, conflict, and high performance, right? That's yeah, for me where that starts.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And obviously I'm asking these questions not because I think, every answer to everything. And it's important that listeners know that as well, right? Because everybody's
Mm,
going to have their own perspectives. And it's important that everybody thinks about what this means to them as well in relation to their
yeah,
situation. Because I think sometimes,
totally.
like I agree with you that, the more you can share, the more somebody else is going to share, like you said, and that's a great starting point. And you probably both go further, right? And to bring others with you. But at the same time, I have an awareness that other people might not be open to receiving that or ready to receive certain things and knowing certain things about certain people because of their own perhaps triggers and their own conditioning as well. Because obviously, being based here in the Middle East, you've got a lot of different cultures in the mix. There's a lot of different
Mm.
perspectives. And we're all human at the end of the day. And I believe we've all got something to share. But I just wonder if there are any particular barriers that you have seen when that vulnerability piece is kind of on the table when building
Mm.
psychological.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially around different cultures, right? And I think understanding different cultural communication styles is pretty key because you brought up the Middle East, similar with the South Americans, Japanese. They're all very high context communicators. So that whole way of communicating where you just tell people what's going on for you can be quite confronting for them. That said, you know, we live in a world now where suicide rates are through the roof.
Yep.
And I am a believer that's because people do not talk enough, right? And they do not connect enough. And so I, yeah, again, maybe you're asking the wrong person here, but my mission is to help open people up in the UAE, to help people talk more in cultures which don't. And, you know, it happens, interestingly, even in the low context cultures, the Scandinavian countries, the Germans, that sort of thing, they communicate in a very low context way, but they don't say the real stuff.
Yeah.
They just give you logistical updates. And it's like, we actually need to start saying that stuff more regularly. And I think what we're talking about here is literally life and death, in some cases, right? Like, because people are so trapped in their own thoughts and so feel that they don't have an ability to share it, that if we can show them that it's okay, then somebody may see that and go, oh, okay, amazing, I can talk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where probably the leader of that specific team and needs to really own what's happening within their team, and what are the characters, what are the cultures, what is the conditioning that is already present, and then figure out how do we perhaps navigate it with all of those things in mind, because it's not a blanket answer, is it? It's going to be different. There needs to be context as well. And I think there's definitely a mindset of, well, there's definitely a mindset for some that work is a place for work. It's not the place to share your personal stuff. What would you say?
Yeah. Love that one. So you don't bring yourself to work. Cool. Yeah. Look, I mean, I hear that all the time, as I'm sure you do, right? And it's the unfortunate thing in that situation is that you of course bring yourself to work, and you of course bring your conditioning to work, and all the way you respond to certain things in the workplace is stuff that you've learned in your personal life. Because before you went to work, the first 18 years of your life, or 15, 13 if you're me, you learned all of these things which you now bring into all of your responses on a day-to-day basis, right? So you don't get to check your personality at the door. It comes with you, right? And that's probably the reason that people hired you, right? Is the way that you are. And so I think learning how to share, learning how to be open, learning how to be vulnerable, and learning how you respond to certain things is pretty key. And I just wanted to say, like, because you've touched on a really good point, and I think I have to check myself here, because I'm very like gung-ho about this. Yeah, just share your story. And I've had people say, I don't want to do that, right now, I'm not okay with it. And that's totally cool. And so I've had a few instances where people just sat there and kind of listened, and then that person has opened up because everybody else was, and shared something deeply personal. And that's the kind of reason why they didn't feel comfortable with it. I've also had people say, I can't do this right now, I'm gonna go. And whatever. And so giving people that option, I think, is what I'm trying to say is pretty key.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've touched on that as well. I'm sort of thinking about my own experience as well when it comes to like sharing some of the bigger things that I've been through. And I've shared things on this podcast, and I've shared probably a lot more on our Stress Relief in Your Pocket podcast as well. It's a bit more personable rather than kind of just workplace related. But what I found, and that podcast started about 3, probably 4 years ago, even now thinking about it, and I gradually started to share my story over time. It was as I started to learn how to articulate my experiences, because I didn't know how to share my story, especially when I was going through it. So if I then was dropped into a situation in a workplace where they're like, share our deepest, darkest secrets, and I know that's obviously not how you would frame the session, but that I wouldn't have known what to say. And that would have added more shame to what I was experiencing, probably more confusion, and perhaps probably a bit more fear in stepping into the conversation as well. So I really like the fact that you've touched on that, letting people know that actually it's okay. You can just share whatever you want, like at whatever level you want. And that's a fantastic contribution. I think that's really, really critical.
Yep, totally agree.
That being said, like all of that being said, I still believe what you said in the beginning of like, the more we can share, the better, because now I'm on the other side of the fence. I get it. Like, it's clicked,
Mm,
you know, and I'm just like, yeah,
mm,
ask me anything, I'm an open book, or I'll share
mm,
whatever, like given the right contact situation.
mm,
And I just think it's sometimes a hard thing to perhaps comprehend
mm.
if you're hearing this for the first time as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think dipping your toe in is a good way to do it, right? And sort of often we'll do a sort of three levels, right? So, hey, what's something tough going on? So we'll go around in a circle. What's something tough going on in work right now?
Mm.
What's something tough going on in your life right now? Okay, what's the toughest thing you've gone through in your life?
Mm.
You know, and so even just dipping your toe in and going, what's something really tough that's happening in work for you right now? Or one we'll usually use actually when we're doing a walk and talk is what's something really challenging happening in your life right now? And because it gives people the opportunity to choose, right? Because there's generally a myriad of things which are difficult in life at any given moment. And so yeah, I think that going deep, yes, but dipping your toe in is okay. And then keep dipping, right? And then put your foot in, and then your whole leg, and then like you and me, you're up and down doing laps.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a great way to think about it as well. It's a nice visual. So one of the other things you touched upon was practicing conflict. Now,
Mm,
I think that's a really interesting idea. Well, not
mm,
idea, it's a thing, right? It's what you do.
mm,
But it's like most of the time conflict happens without any practice, right? And everything blows up, and then there's like, detrimental side effects of that. So talk to us more about why the practice of conflict is so important.
cool, nice one. Okay, so it actually links back to what we were first talking about with this feeling. So, what am I feeling right now? And so, whenever we practice conflict, there's a couple of things happening, right? You're feeling something which might be hijacking your amygdala and sending it to your lizard brain and making you overreact because you have a need,
Yeah.
right? You have a need which is not being met. Generally speaking, well, yeah, no, not generally speaking. When we are conflicting, or when we are we are feeling bad emotions, bad maybe it's the wrong word, but uncomfortable emotions. So like sadness, anger, frustration, those kind of things. When we're feeling those, it's because our needs are not being met, right? And so this is all nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, right? And so there's lots of literature about that, and it's a very simple way to look at conflict management. Yeah, like okay, I'm feeling this sad, frustrated, angry, or happy, complete, fulfilled, whatever. That's when your needs are being met, right? And we should also not discount that stuff, because I think this stuff is important to communicate when that happens too. But so yeah, what am I feeling right now? Charlotte, I feel really a bit frustrated that I haven't got a lovely green wall behind me. And that I'm I haven't put my orange jacket on today. My need is to look as in that is to look sharp on the podcast as well. I don't know, I'm just, making something up here. My request, so all we can ever do is request from other humans, right? We can't control another human. We think we can. And I think that's a common misconception in the workplace too, right? That I'm your boss, therefore I can control you. And the sad news is you can't. And, people can easily and do vote with their feet all of the time, right? You don't leave a bad company, you leave a bad manager. So don't try and control people, just request. So I feel this, I feel a bit annoyed, I feel a bit frustrated, I feel a bit sad or a bit angry. My need in all of that is this. Would you be willing to do this, right? And so that's why the need to practice this is it makes us more literate in it for starters, and it gives us a really pleasant tool for life, right? Because it's essentially a negotiation. For those of you that have kids, I'm sure you'll recognize this. But it's a constant negotiation, isn't it? It's like, this is making me feel this. What I really would like is this. Would you be willing to help me out with that? And generally speaking, when you frame it like that, people say yes. And if they can't help you, they'll say no, because it's a request, right? Framed as such. Does
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. And I kind of visualize this as like building the muscles and doing the reps.
Yes.
Because that, like, emotion will stack up, right? So if we're not pausing to acknowledge and recognize what we're feeling, there's no way we're ever going to be able to communicate that effectively unless we do it first. So there's that rep that needs to happen so that we can then articulate it. But if we don't, those emotions, they stack up, right? And that's when those kind of explosions happen, right? And it's like somebody just leaves and they don't say what they feel because they're bottling it in. Or you have the other extremes, you know, they're shouting from the rooftops what the problem is, or even if they're not shouting it to the leader, they're shouting it to, you know, Bob that sits next to them in the office. And like that again just doesn't really allow for that emotion to process that is attached to the situation that's happening. All that does is it creates more tension and perhaps more unresourceful tension, unresourceful friction within the environment, because then that emotion is being almost like displaced somewhere else. So the reps, I'm just picturing less explosions.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to own up to something, is that I've been really bad at this in my life, really, really bad. And I'm still not perfect, right? Like I'm still, in fact, I would even say I'm still not great, right? Like, you know, like I definitely am an emotional character, right? And so what I've learned is it's really easy to say all of this, but in reality, what happens is when you know, your limbic brain is significantly faster than your executive function, right? And it will hijack you in a moment's notice. Cool, thanks lizard brain, and off I go on an amygdala hijack, and I'm having a go at you because, you know, you didn't let me have a green wall behind me. And so what I've learned I have to do is, when I'm really hijacked, is if I can notice it quickly enough, I have to get out and go, I can't talk about this right now, I'll be back.
Yep.
It's not you, I just have to calm down. Yep. Or, you know, if I can take some deep breaths, if there's no escaping it, like really, you know, internally taking some deep breaths and just kind of calming myself down. But that was the biggest thing I had to work on, right? And I'm still working on, is really in the moment calming myself down. Because it hurts me, right? It physically hurts me. And so I think it's all lovely to have that strategy, but that's the thing that I actually get that asked that a lot, is like, in the moment, if I'm going for it, like, what do I do? And the other thing I'd add to that, and I actually learned through going through a 12-step program, is that saying sorry is powerful, right? Just saying, I'm so sorry, I screwed that up. You know, like, I'm really sorry for the way I spoke. You know, that was wrong of me. How do we make this right? You know, and just shutting up then and letting that person say their bit again is really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And that breeds the trust, right? You being vulnerable enough to say, I'm sorry, and actually, you know, hands up, that wasn't quite what I had intended. You know, again, it goes back to what we said earlier, and that just creates a deeper bond actually as well, even though it perhaps didn't go to like perfect picture strategy, like textbook style. Well, the way I used to experience my unresourceful emotions in the workplace was in conflict would be crying. I would just burst into tears. I couldn't say, like, the emotion would get stuck, and it almost like get stuck in my throat and then just bypass through my eyes and I would just start crying and just get so frustrated with myself that I couldn't then communicate what it was I was trying to say. And it was in more kind of extreme scenarios. But for me, that was, again, just unresolved emotions or unaddressed emotions, like what we're talking about here, when I've just tried to stuff it down rather than actually practice conflict. I don't think I've ever been taught how to practice conflicts, not even now. I think I've got better at it naturally over time, and probably my coaching background has played a big part in that. But I'm fascinated by the idea of practicing conflict. I just think it's brilliant. So what practical tools could you, or tips could you share for a leader that might be listening to this, and myself, to practice conflict?
Yeah, nice one. Well, I think the first one is know what your de-escalation strategy is, right, for yourself. So when you're heightened, what do you need to do to actually calm yourself down, is what I mean by that, right? So for me, going for a walk, you know, going to the gym for me actually is really key. If I go and lift heavy stuff, I feel so much better afterwards. So know what your strategy is for that. Then coming back and using that feelings, needs, requests, right? So I felt this, and looking at it as an actual feeling that you had, not a feeling that you're supposing someone else has put on you. So you made me annoyed. I felt annoyed because of what you did. It's like, actually, I felt frustrated, or I felt sad, or I felt angry, and my need in that. So linking that and going, what's my need, right? And it's a little bit, it is a bit of sort of, it's a different frame, but it's CBT, right? It's cognitive behavioral stuff. So yeah, what did I feel? What's my need in that? And then what am I going to request from this person? And try and don't come back until you've got that thought through, if you can avoid it till then, and say, and come back with okay, this is what I felt. This is really what it made me feel. And even think about it in terms of where you felt it in your body. What's your need in that? And then what do you need to request of that other person to try and change things? And then shush, shut up and listen, and get them, let them say their piece, and they may trigger you again, and that's okay. Do it again, do it again, do it again. So de-escalate, then feelings, needs, requests, and then listen would be my suggestions.
That's really, really perfect, concise thing that somebody can just walk away and use now. For me, I think I'm good at the feeling part, I'm good at the request part, but probably not identifying what's actually not quite right within my own needs as well, and what needs not being met. So that's good. That's really, really useful. And I can see exactly how that would move to a place of growth, right, and progress after that de-escalation, obviously, which makes sense, especially in a workplace setting. So there might be some listeners that are hearing this conversation and they might be thinking, yeah, but is it really that important? I've been leading this way for so long. Is psychological safety really that important? What do you say to
them? Yeah, great question. And I think when I have those conversations, generally what I have to do is bring it back to money, right? And the reason for that is that teams that are psychologically safe and are clear, have clear boundaries, have clear purpose, all of that kind of stuff, grow 3 times faster. And that's not in head count, that's in revenue, and they're 20% more profitable on average. So, if you're struggling as to why, and you're going, I don't need to be cozy, or I don't need to have Candid, but I'd like more money. There's a reason. And yeah, I think the other part is, if you're growing a company and you're wanting to attract good talent, retain good talent, have talent that's working hard for you and is committed to the cause, that's what you need, right? Because people will show up for you and go to battle for you, as I kind of mentioned, and it will become part of their DNA when they've got that buy-in. When you avoid, so avoidant tactics in the workplace of kind of just, avoiding the hard conversations, that's a big one in psychological safety, right? Because people kind of go, oh, well, it's psychologically safe, I'll just leave that conversation away. But no, bring it in. And so when you avoid, when you talk behind people's backs, when you set that up, what you will find is that people don't want to come to work. That's when the Monday morning dread sets in, right? It's like, I have to go and deal with that again. We want to create this culture where there's so much candor, there's so much transparency, there's so much fairness and transparency and kind of certainty. So that's looking at the SCARF model by David Rock, right? Like moving people towards a reward response constantly of giving them real clear certainty, real transparency. As much, in the business, people go, oh great, I'm in and I'll be there on Monday and I feel good, right? Because I know what's going on and I feel part of the fabric. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So you've touched on obviously some of the benefits and the consequences of good psychological safety and it being present within a business. Are there any specific metrics that leadership can track directly correlating to psychological safety?
Yeah, good. The ones we look at the most are attrition and absenteeism. So when you've got a lot of absenteeism or sickness going on, people, generally speaking, unless they've got some underlying health issues, are probably sick, 3-4 times a year, like actually sick, maybe less. And so when somebody's sick once a month, something else is going on, right? And so that generally, I think, will mean, actually, I don't think, I know, will be leading towards be leading towards a lack of psychological safety, a lack of ability to say their piece and be listened to and feel respected in the workplace. Those are the metrics we generally look at is absenteeism and attrition rate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That makes perfect sense as well, because like it's too easy, isn't it, to just put it down to, they're just sick, and that's where the full stop goes, and we don't actually look into what's going on as to why, and look at the actual individual to see what they're experiencing. There's something else that came to mind as you were speaking there, is this pattern that I've seen across multiple different types of organizations where other people feel the need to voice up perhaps what other people can't. And I see this very commonly here in the UAE, where there are perhaps certain nationalities that don't have, but based on those cultural differences that we described before, that it would be disrespectful, and they fear obviously losing their job to be able to say something that's wrong. But they then tell somebody that they do trust, and there obviously is a sense of psychological safety with, but then it's on that person's shoulders to then almost deliver that up the chain. And for me, that definitely highlights a lack of psychological safety, from the top down. But I'm really curious to know kind of your thoughts on that, and if that's a pattern that you've noticed or seen.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen it loads, and I think somebody else being able to be your voice maybe initially is not terrible, but I think if you are that person who, well, I guess if you are either of those people, you need to, as the person who doesn't feel comfortable saying it, learn to be comfortable, and the person who is the confidant and who is being asked to speak up, encourage them to speak up, rather than it's the whole give a person a fish, right? Rather than teach them to fish, right? So, if we're wanting to develop this place where people can speak up, then letting them actually speak up for themselves will be more powerful than you doing it for them. But yes, I see that a lot. And you'll be in a team situation, and hey, is there something else going on here? Back to being hyper vigilant. It's like, it feels like there's something not being said here. And there will be some people who are kind of awkward, and then someone will go, well, such and such has something to say. And it's like, interesting. Okay, what have you got to say? Okay, and how come you didn't feel you were able to say that?
Nice.
So again, really kind of creating that space and holding that space, and that's it was interesting. I did a bunch of study and research in leadership recently, and one of the key themes was leaders being able to hold space, which I did not expect, which was super cool, and that comes back to that.
Yeah. So, with all of that in mind, tell us a bit more about what you do specifically when Braver Leaders goes into an organization. What is obviously there's coaching involved in this. Is there almost like a training as part of it as well, like the skill building element to it, and also like where do you start? Do you start with leadership? Do you just bring everyone together all at once? Like, tell us what paint a picture. What does this look like?
Interestingly, we've kind of been talking through it. We have a process which is the acronym Braver, because easy to remember. It's in the name, which is build trust and awareness, rupture and repair, which is conflict, a combined purpose and identity, values and ways of working, elevating your team with high performing habits. So we use that rather than goals, and then looking at real accountability. And so that's the process, and it's it looks lovely on a piece of paper, and it looks nice and linear, and it never is. We always start with the diagnostic phase, looking at research and say what's really going on, right? And once we ascertain that, then it's looking at where we might start in that and what's the point at which we need to kind of meet the team, because there's no team is the same, and meeting a team where they're at is kind of all you can do, right? And the answer is it depends, because and we learned this recently, you can't coach every team, because sometimes they are not formed enough, they're not ready enough, they don't understand how to conflict enough to actually be coached. They need leadership development first, right? And so there is more of a teach element. Once we've done the teach, then you can maybe look at, okay, we move to team coaching. And I think team coaching is, it's hard to sell for starters, because not many people know what it is, but it's essentially leading a conversation rather than a process. So sometimes we have to start with a process and then go into the conversation. Other times it's the conversation which informs the process. And so you have the conversation first, you get the team talking, and what comes out of that is, here's where we need to develop. Can you help us with that? And so, that's generally how it works. One of the big things is obviously continually, and we're doing this a lot more now, is continually seeing where we're at, seeing what's working, what's not, what we can do better, and feeding that back into the program so that it just keeps growing. And it's like this kind of moving feast, whatever the word is, that happens as you do it. That would be kind of a brief overview of what we get up to.
Yeah, perfect. And I think you've showcased through this conversation like the ways in which you would, like the types of things that you could be including within that as well, which is fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about the braver part. I get this, your acronym, but it just seems too perfect that you have to be brave to be the leader that takes the first step into all of this in the first place. Like, is there a little story behind that? Is there actual connection to that?
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, totally. Well, I think it links back to that lecture in 2015, I want to say, where my lecturer, Dr. David Harris, he wrote a book on why the All Blacks would lose the 2007 World Cup. Quite funny, deeply unpopular in New Zealand, but very accurate. He said, go deep, and you have to do that first, or you won't build trust, right? So it was about being brave. Yeah. And I did it, right? I shared about, I wasn't even sober at that point, and I shared, man, I've got a real problem with drinking. I don't know how to control it. That was all I said. And it stopped everybody, right? And I was like, oh, whoa, you're all listening to me. Felt like that was the first time I probably really noticed that happen in my life, right? There was people like were genuinely interested in what I had to say. And so it was like, oh, okay, cool. What's that about? And so, yeah, for me, it was this, you have to be ready to take a leap of faith to build trust. And that requires bravery, right? And so, and this will be my learning for the rest of my life, I reckon, is that leadership is not it's not a job description, it's a personality trait, right? And so anybody can be a leader, and being brave and being okay to say, man, I don't know everything. And you said that earlier. So I don't know everything. How could I? How could you? Like, we live in a world where there is so much information that there's no way we could ever know everything. But own what you know, and be prepared to say, I don't know, as well, really shows that you are who you are and you're okay with that. And it's a brave thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was far too synchronized for that not to have like a deeper meaning behind it, for sure. I love that, Sam. So thank you so much for sharing that. What just for our listeners, like, what are some of the problems that leaders come to you with that your solutions actually solve? What are some of the core?
Yeah, nice one. Lack of alignment is generally pretty big. People will be leaving. There'll be a sense of kind of discontent in the team in general, which is a lack of connectedness. So those are the ones that we generally focus on. The other one I would say is growing pains, right? That's kind of the catch-all for them, right? Is people are experiencing growing pains, which means they've grown, they've it was easy because there wasn't that many of them, and now there's quite a few. We work with teams that are growing a lot, generally speaking. And how do we then get you realigned, get you connected so that you actually feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself and you enjoy it, and that you can actually achieve your goals, right? And actually achieve get the habits sorted that you actually need to continually show up to do to hit what you need to as a business.
Yeah, brilliant. I can see exactly how you would be solving that as well with what I know of your work as well. So I think if anybody's listening that is experiencing any problems like that, please do make sure you reach out to Sam. So Sam, I've got a couple more questions for you. One is, what do you foresee happening in the future of workplace wellbeing?
Oh yeah, we talked about this, didn't we? So I think with the emergence of, and one of my mentors said this to me, which I loved, is that with the emergence of AI is going to do the things that we don't need our humanness to do, right? So the workplace wellbeing trends will be that we show up as our whole selves and we really connect on this human level, I think. So there's a real need now for authenticity. And you can see people, I mean, if you look at it, it's all over social media, isn't it? And it's all about, be your authentic self and actually show up to work as yourself. I think very few people are doing it well. Very few workplaces, I should say, are doing it well, where you can actually show up as yourself. And then one other that I'd say, and I just posted about this morning, is that this whole idea of, it's not a new idea, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this whole idea that community and sort of creating that through my experience of a family anyway, that family vibe where you can say whatever you want and know that people aren't, you can have a what did my lecturer say, passionate debate without fear of upheaval, right? Where you can have that's going to be paramount. And the companies that don't have that, they may last a while, they may hit some goals, but they won't be the long-standing ones, right? And if you look at, so I have a good friend that is relatively high up in Google in London. If you walk around their office, you can see it, you can sense it. There's this like sense of kind of community there, of like they all sit and eat lunch together every day. And that's pretty cool, like that kind of, Google's well known for its culture, right? And I think it's taken a bit of a hit recently. I don't think he'd mind me saying that. It's taken a bit of a hit with the layoffs, right? But they do a lot to repair that stuff. And so I think the companies that are inauthentic and don't that kind of gloss over that and avoid hard conversations and don't really try and get to know their colleagues will go a bit, but not the whole way.
I couldn't agree more. There's nothing I would even add to that, because that's exactly the same way that I see things going with AI. I think you're absolutely right. One of my mentors says that AI is going to remove the functionality of our roles and increase our vitality of our roles, and we can only have vitality if there's human connection, in my eyes. So I think that's you've hit the nail on the head. Brilliant. Okay, so my second to last question is, you chose the global goal of quality education as your kind of cause with the donation from this episode. Why is quality education so important for you?
Yeah, great question. And I think what's number one on them? Is it no poverty? I think it is, isn't it, on the SDGs? Yeah. My opinion is that education underpins every single other SDG, right? And so if you don't know why no poverty is important, then why would you bother? If you don't know why clean drinking water is important, why would you bother? That's my opinion. So I kind of, particularly looking at developing countries around their birth rates and all of that kind of thing, right? Like why contraception might be important, all of that stuff, like education, particularly in developing countries and women, is so important, right? And so yeah, it was a no-brainer for me. That's really where we would start. And yeah, that's my
Amazing.
response to
Thank you
that.
so much. Thank you. This podcast is not just about thriving in the workplace. It is about becoming a force for good as well. And I truly believe the work that you're doing is unlocking that for individuals in the workplace, but also for organizations. So big thank you for the work that you do. And my final question is, where can our listeners obviously come and follow your work? Because obviously you've got your own podcast as well. Tell our listeners about that. Obviously you're posting on LinkedIn. What else do they need to know?
Oh, mate. Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and I really appreciate your questions, and I really can't wait to have you on the Braver Leaders podcast. So yeah, we have a Braver Leaders podcast, which is all about owning your story, sharing it, and growing trust. We're online at braverleaders.com, Instagram Braver Leaders Teams, and you can find me, Sam Harvey, on LinkedIn, and yeah, come along for the ride, and you'll hear warts and all stories about what I did when I was being an idiot in my teens. So you can have a bit of a giggle and know safely that I don't do that stuff anymore. So yeah, look, but I really appreciate you having me on, Charlotte, and I think we could probably talk for a couple more hours on this.
Easily.
But yeah, I really appreciate the kind of depth of your questioning and your quality of your attention, and yeah, I'm very grateful for your friendship too.
Oh, right back at you, Sam. Right back at you. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to being a guest on your show. And I've got a funny feeling you're going to be back for the next season of this show as well. 100% is going to happen. But thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Then share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.